Yay! All right, I have tried 5 times to make this video. I thought, let's go outside. It'll be sweet. The scenery will look awesome. Turns out these are transition lenses. I had to buy contacts, so I got contacts so you could actually see my eyes. Turns out there's a lot of gnats. Turns out it's incredibly hot in Arizona in the desert. Turns out the sun goes down pretty quickly. Coyotes were chasing me. Point is, let's just get into the video. This video is about the medical school application. It can be quite a bit, but I'm here to offer you some help because obviously we don't have enough of it on the internet. All right, let's be real. There is a ton of content out there, but here's why I'm making this video. If there was something that I wish I had seen, it would have been one video covering everything you're going to have to do for medical school. Watch one thing and then feel a little bit less stressed. When I was going through it all, things felt very arbitrary. It felt like I didn't know what to trust. I didn't know all the parts. And some of the stuff seems so basic that I feel like people don't actually cover it. I want dates. I want probably a little bit of preparation, a little bit of advice. And then I want to see what somebody actually did so I can almost follow them and I can know what to expect. And that's why I'm making this video for you here today. Here's the outline. I'm going to cover the primary application, I'm going to cover the secondary application, I'm going to cover the interviewing stage, and then I'm going to cover at the very end the hoops you will have to jump through. So that's going to be 4 sections. For each section, I'm going to explain what you're going to have to do, how to kind of prepare for it all, timelines, and then I'll give you some specific quick advice. At the end of the video, this might be something you just want to skip to, I'm going to break down my personal timeline for everything that I did, so that way you can kind of follow me and you can know what to expect on those dates. Things are going to differ in this video. I just heard that they've already made changes to Casper. I'm going to guess the dates are a little bit different, but everything should kind of align enough. And a quick note, you need to be inspired while going through the medical school application. I kind of didn't know what I was getting myself into quite enough, and at times I just kind of gave up, if I'm being brutally honest. I thought, oh man, I don't even know why I'm doing this application. People are not going to really care about what I'm writing, and that is such a terrible mindset. Inspiration, I think, is having purpose for doing something, and it's also feeling like you are capable of doing that thing, and that's what you need to have. You are capable of getting into medical school. All right, a little bit of context. Let's get this out of the way. I applied to 38 medical schools, 27 MD and 11 DOs. I have currently received 11 interviews. I had 6 to DO schools, 5 to MD schools. I only decided to interview at 8 of them, but I received 8 acceptances, 3 to MD and 5 were to DO. All right, this next section is gonna be for people who are pretty new to the application cycle. So you can skip ahead if you want, but getting into medical school basically hinges on 3 distinct stages, okay? It's going to be your pre-med career, your medical school application, and then your medical school interview. Your pre-med career is everything that you do as you would think before you start applying to medical school. It's the long 4 years. It's your GPA, your MCAT score, gaining experiences, etc. All that crap, okay? I'm not going to be talking about any of that in this video. The next stage, though, is the applying stage. It's when it's time to apply to medical school. You are going to submit an application that shows the culmination of your entire pre-med career. Who you are, why medicine, why school should accept you, right? And then there are really 2 parts to this. You have the primary application, and then you have the secondary application that you're going to send. There's lots of writing, there's no more science. The final thing that you need to do, the last stage to punch your ticket into medical school, is the interview stage. It's very different from anything else you'll experience. It's the only time medical schools get to see you live. It's by far the most personal component of the entire journey. And it's very different from everything else. There's no science, there's not really any writing, it's just interacting with people. Section 1, the primary application. Let's break it down. When you're applying to medical schools in the United States, there are 3 systems that you can use. The AMCAS is for MD schools, the AA-COMAS is for DO schools, and the TMD SAS is just for public medical schools in Texas. Everything's bigger and harder in Texas. Moving on. These 3 systems are going to be used for your primary applications. When you apply, you can use 1, 2, or all 3. It just depends what schools you want to apply to. For example, if you want to go to a DO school, you use the AA-COMAS. The good news is all 3 are pretty similar, so you'll be able to reuse writings and save a lot of time if you use more than one system. In fact, I think a lot of the schools want you to. A lot of the different systems do because they make the writings nowadays pretty similar in terms of length as well. Once you fill out the primary application, you can send it to as many schools within that specific system as you want. So for example, I sent all 27 MD schools in the AMCAS the same primary application. The primary application basically consists of what I call the Big Five. You will enter your personal statement, your experiences, which are basically 15 smaller essays, letters of recommendation, a lot of tedious information about yourself. So this is kind of basic stuff, coursework, transcripts, MCAT score, etc. And finally, the list of medical schools that you are going to be sending all of this to. There is a ton of content on each of these. I'm gonna hit on them a little bit. This isn't going to be exhaustive though, but the personal statement is a 5,300 character response to the prompt. Explain why you want to go to medical school. Now, for your experience essays, you get to pick up to 15 experiences to write about. You get 700 characters per essay, and they can be literally about anything that you want to talk about in your life. Specifically though, on the AMCAS application, you get to pick your favorite 3 experiences to elaborate on, and you get an extra 1,325 characters for these. So again, each application kind of differs a little bit, but they're very similar. Here is the primary application timeline. I would start working on your personal statement and experiences by late February. I would ask for letters of recommendation by early March. Then I would start researching schools and creating your list of schools you want to attend in early April. The primary application preparation. There's so much info out there, but research the primary application as early as you can in your pre-med career. You do not have to go crazy with it. You don't have to be somebody who's in their undergraduate and is building their entire life around medicine, but it's a good idea to know what's expected because you're going to need time to get all the things ready to go. Your experiences, your letters of recommendation, your MCAT scores, etc. My advice for the primary application. Obviously, this is no new news, but submitting it as early as possible is huge. How big of a difference can it make?
A lot, according to AAMC.
I don't really understand it, but people know this and they still don't do it. I think it helps to write about your experiences first before your personal statement, because doing that will let you see everything that you've done, and then you can start picking the ones that you want to incorporate into your personal statement. Biggest mistake I see is people writing about too much. It's super hard to tell your life story in one quick paper, so don't do it. TLDR, start with your experiences for your primary application. Tell specific stories with lots of details, and if it doesn't relate to medicine, you gotta axe it, okay? Don't try to force it into your essays even as badly as you may want to. I'll mention this again later, but if you have writer's block, here's a good tip. You will set a timer, okay? I want you to do this for maybe 5-10 minutes, whatever it is, and then you will force yourself to finish whatever you are working on in that time. It helps you to loosen up, trust me. And it kind of gives you a challenge or a goal because you're going to sit there and say, I can't really do this in 10 minutes, but you'll figure out pretty quickly that actually you can get a lot done in a very short amount of time. For letters of recommendation, it's very simple. This can be a little bit nerve-wracking for some people, but without thinking, just say out loud who you would want to write you a letter, who you think would be a good letter writer for you, and then simply just ask those people without fear. Don't think about it. Just think, who should I have write my letters? And then send them an email if you're too nervous, and send them references with things like transcripts, your primary application, personal statement, experiences. Send all that crap to them, so now they have an idea a little bit more about who you are and what they can write. When you're storing letters of recommendation, you can use Interfolio. You can also, I think, just send them the link directly to the application when the time comes. It just depends how early you want to collect your letters. I'm gonna rate the primary application. I would rate the primary application as a 7 out of 10 in terms of difficulty and a 6 out of 10 in terms of fun. The primary application is difficult because you want your writings to be really good since it's the first thing any medical school is going to see about you. The good news is though, you have tons of time for this. You know exactly what the prompts are, and you can start working on these as soon as you want. My least favorite part of the primary application was actually the letters of recommendation. I thought it was just a lot of tedious work sometimes with having to store them. Also, I want to pick my best letter writers, but some schools, they have, people that they want to see a letter from. Somebody from your major, somebody from the science professor, which makes sense, but they're not always gonna be your best letter writers, so you're gonna have to kind of develop those relationships over time, hopefully. To be safe, for it to be ideal, you probably want 2 from a science professor, you want 1 from somebody in your major if you're not a science major, and then you want at least 1 or 2 from your bosses, maybe 1 from a boss and 1 from a doctor. My favorite part of the entire process was writing my experiences. Take time to reflect on how far you've come and what you've done. There are so many good memories over these, different experiences that I was able to look back on, and that's why I love writing about them. It brought back those memories, and we gotta reflect on how good we've had it sometimes. Oh, that reminds me, one of my favorite experiences, paying for secondary applications. The next main section, secondary applications. Here's our next big hurdle. Once those primary applications are sent, schools now have you on their radar, and they will send you what is called a secondary application. Pretty much every single school is going to send you one of these secondary applications, because if you're even remotely competitive, they are going to make a lot of money. Every secondary application I got was about $100 to maybe $200. It was probably around 100, maybe 150, and I received one from every single school. You're going to receive your secondary application through an email, okay? You're going to get a link to a website, a portal thing, where you're going to create your username, your password, and then you're going to have access to the secondary application, and that's when things kind of get real. The secondary applications are more unique and specific to each school, but here's kind of what to generally expect from a secondary application portal. You're going to have to fill out some more basic, tedious information about you and your family. You're also going to have to fill out essays. This is the main portion. You're going to get about maybe, I'd say 3 to 5 essays. You're also going to upload a picture of yourself. So if you don't have a good picture of yourself, get one ready. You will also fill out information saying that you have taken all their required prerequisite courses. And then you'll have a dedicated page to pay and submit your essays. The main focus, again, of the secondary application is those new essays that each school are going to give. They're way more specific, and I found that most med schools probably had about 3 to 5 questions that I had to write essays for. Unlike the primary application, there's a lot of range for these essays. Secondaries typically come out in mid-June through July. This is about a month after you submit your primary application, given that you submitted everything as early as possible. But again, you don't have to worry about if you're going to get a secondary application, because you will receive it. Almost all schools want the money. What is more important is how long it takes to submit your secondary application after you get it. A realistic goal for submitting secondaries is to submit to your top schools within 2.5 weeks of receiving a secondary, and all other schools within maybe 3.5 weeks. Start pre-writing your secondary essays as soon as you are done with your primary application. Go online, look for old prompts, and then you can start knocking them out, starting specifically with schools that you want to prioritize. Also, create a system early on that works for you. If you apply to a lot of schools, it will be a ton of writing. Focus on one essay at a time. Start with your priority schools. Use those writings then to help with other essays. Reach out to someone early on who's willing to overlook your essays, maybe like a friend, a family member, something like that. You're gonna write so much, you may not catch all your mistakes anymore. So you have to have others to proofread all your stuff, and you want people to also refresh you during this time. Schools receive so many essays, so you need to make your essay stand out. Duh. However, always make sure that you specifically answer the questions that they ask. If you're stuck, one of the best strategies that I had for writing my secondary essays that I wish I would have used more, is to get a timer, set that timer for a ridiculous amount of short time, and say, I'm going to finish this essay in that time. I would say maybe 10 minutes for an essay. You want to give yourself hard constraints so that your filter comes off. You don't want to waste all your energy on making sure every sentence sounds perfect. You just kind of want to get the overall outline. You want to make sure that you're answering the question, and you want to kind of speak from the heart. And then afterwards, you can go back and you can modify it later. And again, they will read thousands of essays answering the same prompt. So get as specific as you can with details. And people love humility. They love passion. They love, I don't know, caring for others. Of course, who wouldn't want that? If I was reading something, these are human beings. I don't want to see somebody who's arrogant. I want to see somebody who's very humble and loves other people. I would rate the secondaries as a 9 out of 10 on the difficulty scale and a 3 out of 10 on the fun scale. The secondary applications were by far my least favorite part of the entire cycle. My least favorite part of the secondary application was just the sheer amount of essays. My favorite part of the secondary application was getting to know each school a little bit more. And some schools, you'll notice, give out a ton of information. Some schools can be a little bit more limited with the information you get from them, but overall, you'll get to learn a lot about each medical school, and you can start dreaming, which is super cool. Next up, the interviewing stage. This is possibly the longest and most anxiety-inducing part of the process. For the most part, you're not really doing anything. If you applied early, primary applications in May, your secondary applications 2 to 3 weeks after that, then you will most likely have all of your secondaries done probably by August. And now you wait and hope and vent on Reddit. Schools can send rejections, interview wait lists, interview invitations, all that throughout the rest of the cycle. If a school wants you, they will send you an interview over an email. They're gonna tell you where your interview is, how it's taking place, all the good stuff. They're probably gonna give you a date to select. Some schools don't. Some schools just tell you there's a date that you have to be there and you need to show up. And it usually will occur in two formats. You have the traditional interview and the MMI interview. The traditional interview is pretty much what you think of. You're sitting down with somebody across from you. It's a personal conversation. They're gonna ask you some questions about probably why medicine, why yourself. Very typical interview. The MMI is a little bit more complex. It's usually 10 quick interviews, maybe a little bit less, but each interview will have its own specific question. It's kind of like speed dating. Personally, the traditional I enjoyed more, but both are fine. You can prepare for both. In general, a kind of a good rule is if you get a terrible interviewer from a school, that's kind of a red flag at the school. Most of the interviewers I had, in fact, every single one, I'll say, was extremely nice. And they were even like, hey, you did a good job. Because they could tell I was nervous during some of them. So if there's a school that's, people are jerks or they give terrible MMIs or terrible traditional interviews, that's kind of on them. If you have the option to do in-person or online, I would do it in person. You learn so much more about the school. It's way more fun. You get to meet people, which is actually one of the best things about, I think, interviewing. It's a mix. I was kind of glad I had both. Here is the timeline. These dates are based on applying very early in the cycle. So if you applied later, if you did not apply in May, you applied way later, you're going to get interviewed later. For DO schools, the sweet spot is September and October for interviews. I received all 6 of my interview invites in September. DO schools tend to interview earlier on in the cycle because the primary application also opens up earlier and can be submitted earlier. DO schools require earlier decisions as well. Applicants who are accepted before November 15th, they have to make a decision by about mid-December. For each of my 6 DO acceptances, I had to have my deposit due between December 13th and 15th. For comparison, my MD schools, they have not required pretty much anything. For MD schools, I believe the majority of interviews are given from September through January. It's not really a narrow timeline. If I have to get more narrow, more specific, I would say September through the end of November are the hotspots for competitive applicants. I don't see very many interviewing in August, and I don't see many interviewing after January for the most part. For my friends, for myself, the majority of our interviews came in September, October, and November. To give some actual numbers, the University of Arizona Medical School in Phoenix has an MD admissions tracker that literally shows you everything, how the cycle is going, how many people have been interviewed, how many acceptances there are. By November 15th, they had interviewed 329 applicants, and by mid-February, they had interviewed 496. So unless the school has a lot more interviews to give out, uncharacteristically, this data suggests that roughly 2/3 of the interviews were given out by early November. And to think, Harvard didn't accept me with that kind of research. No, seriously, after saying that out loud, I would take all that with a grain of salt. But it just feels like roughly 2/3 of interviews are given out by Thanksgiving and maybe 1/3 after. The majority of my rejections and when I felt like a school kind of gave up on me was probably about February. The good news is though, is that I kind of think that if you nail the interview, like if you're awesome, they are going to want you in their class. So as long as you get an interview, whenever it happens, you're kind of in control at that point. All right, interview preparation. Start your prep, I would say once secondaries are done. I would start it sooner if you want to be ideal, maybe late July, but it's so hard with how much work you have to do for secondaries. What I would do to be fully ready for interviews are 3 things. 1, I would have specific answers prepared for each medical school interview. 2, I would have 6 questions that you can ask your interviewers. 3 for faculty interviewers, and then 3 questions ready for current medical students. That would be 6 total. And then lastly, I would just practice as much as you can. Every type of interview question that you can find, preferably in front of a mirror, on Zoom, in front of somebody like live. You can find hundreds of interview questions, put them into a Google Sheet, and then use a random number generator to randomly practice. I would also set up at least 2 mock interviews. The most important thing, there's a lot of information, but the most important thing is that you can practice and you'll see immediately that you get better with just more practice. Here are 2 things that completely transformed my interviewing skills. Be excited / positive to give an answer, and make it personal. Those two things actually go very much together. So here's the thing. Whenever I was practicing, okay, and I was just trying to sound like, oh, super profound, and I was trying to get my answer across, and I was kind of like a little negative, or I thought, I'm not gonna be able to do good with this, or I panicked, obviously, I gave the worst answers in the world. It was like, I didn't even speak English in the world. However, as soon as I had a positive mindset, when I said, man, that person sitting across the table, they are going to be excited to hear from me. I was, without thought, I just gave my honest opinions, my honest thoughts, and I nailed it. I didn't have one interview where I walked away from and I was like, that went really poorly, because I was just myself and I was excited to give an answer. When you can tell a personal story, it makes it so much more interesting for both you and the interviewer. It makes it more interesting for you to tell. It makes it more interesting for the interviewer to listen to it. And so I'm not trying to say work a story into everything you do. That's not really realistic. But if you can, what I would say do is practice storytelling. For every interview, here are the questions that I had answers basically memorized for. So I would have, tell me about yourself. I would have why medicine, why our school, why you would be a good fit for our school, and then why should we accept you into our school. All of those questions I would have ready to go. Then when it's your turn, here's a good question that you can ask your interviewer. So here's one that's really good. I'd love to hear more about your journey and time at the school. Why did you choose to work at this school or attend this school? If you're talking to a student, what brought you here? That's a great opening question because it allows your interviewer to talk about themselves, which people love to do, and it kind of brings the school back down to earth. You get to hear about the people who are actually there. It builds a relationship. You might use that relationship later to help you while you're in medical school. I would rate interviewing for medical schools as a 6 out of 10 for difficulty and an 8 out of 10 for fun. My least favorite part of the interview process was the opening introductions that we always had to give in front of everybody. It's a little nerve-wracking. My favorite part of the interview process were the traditional interviews that I had with the faculty. For me, interviewing was the best part of the entire application process. The PTSD comes from everything else. Some can feel more anxious for interviews because it's generally harder to know exactly what to expect, but once the day came, I enjoyed the presentations, learning about the schools, and something I wasn't thinking about too much was actually my interactions with the other, students, the other applicants that were going to be there. And it made me kind of think, wow, medicine's in the hands of good people who are going to care about their patients. So I loved it. Throughout the entire application cycle, you can kind of feel like you're just a number. Okay, it's easy to just see, oh, the stats and how many people get accepted and the MCAT and GPAs and whatnot. And so it's really nice to get to go to a school, to get to interact with real people and to see, wow, these people actually do care about their applicants, who they're letting in. They do take a holistic process. It's not just arbitrary. It's not like they just pick a random person out of a hat. So everything I just talked about, all 3 sections are the big kahunas: the primary application, the secondary application, interviewing. But now we got some small fish to fry. The following extras are parts of the application that I really never knew about. Okay, I had kind of no idea that I would have to do or that they were required, but they are. And this is really where I'm hoping to save you some time and some hassle. Remember, it may feel like there is constantly one more hoop that you have to jump through, but if you keep going, it will end. We have to die sometime. Here are the main hoops that I encountered. I ranked them in terms of hassle, from the most hassle to the least hassle. Here's the list: Casper, Snapshot, Kira Assessments, Duet, and lastly, the AAMC, SJT, and VITA. These are the 6 hoops that you'll most likely have to jump through. And we're gonna start talking about probably the biggest one, the Casper. It's basically an online test that is there to judge how good of a person you are. So you'll get some life scenario, some problem, and then you will have to give advice on it through typed responses, but also live responses. Here's an example. A coworker comes in smelling like alcohol. You consider telling your boss, but you know that the coworker really needs the job because they're broke. What do you do? The Casper is an online test, so you're going to be doing it on the keyboard, or if it's a video, if they're going to be recording you, it's going to be through your webcam. And your webcam, I believe, has to be on throughout the entirety of the test. That's how they kind of prevent cheating. The timeline. So the Casper scores, I believe, still only work for 1 cycle, and you need to have them ready to go and submit when your secondary application is done, because you want schools to evaluate your entire application. Casper scores take about 3 weeks-ish to come back. Therefore, I would take it a month before you submit your secondary applications. I would just knock it out, early on, and then you don't have to worry about it. The good news is you don't need a ton of time to prepare. I prepped for about a week at night for the typing portion, and I scored in the 4th quartile. It doesn't take long to find good strategies that will set you up for success. So don't panic, it's not the MCAT, and realize that with minimal practice, as long as it's very focused and you practice a lot of scenarios, you will be fine. Now, the bad news is that it gets sent to a lot of schools, and so you feel like you really need to do well on it, and you also don't know too much about it. Nobody knows how big of a role it plays in your medical school acceptance. Nobody knows the exact score you got as well. They kind of just give you a quartile. They never break it up into a percentile. So there's a little bit of vagueness with the Casper. My advice: give yourself around 1.5 weeks to prepare. Use the Pepper DJ method. Write out the problem, the perspectives, the responsibilities, the decision, and then the justification for a given scenario. And again, with minimal time, you're going to find a strategy. You're going to get into a rhythm that works. So next up is the Casper Snapshot. So what Snapshot was, is it was like a live video version of Casper, and it was brand new last year. It was made again by Casper, and you had access to it when you purchased Casper. I kind of forgot to mention, all these hoops cost money. The good news, however, though, is that you get to prepare for interviewing. I would use my Casper prep to propel my interview prep. What I would do is I would sit down right here and I would practice, and then by the time actual interviewing came, I felt much more prepared because I had already practiced my interview by using Snapshot to propel it. The next hoop, Kira assessments. Some schools utilize Kira assessments for their interviews. It's a one-way interview, except it's going to be way more specific for each medical school. And from what I understand, from what I did it pretty much just served as the interview itself. So you will get recorded questions given by faculty, and then you'll have about maybe 30 seconds to think about it, and then you'll have to give your answer to that question in about, I think you get 1.5 minutes for a timed response. Again, it's gonna be more specific to each school than Snapshot or Casper, but if you prepare like any other interview, because this is going to occur during your interview timeline, then it's actually just an easier interview because you're given 30 seconds to think it over, and you're not talking to somebody live. There's no extra questions. It's just that one question that you're gonna get from each person. I only had to do one of them, and it was for Des Moines, and they just used that as their real interview. So the bad news about the Kira assessment is it's kind of lame to do this instead of a real live interview. There's no connection, there's no discussion. You just get a question and you answer it real quick, and it's kind of like, was that really it? The good news about Kira assessments though is, like I said, it's an easy interview. Next up, duet. This is what I had to do. With so many of these hoops, you never know what's gonna change, so I'm not sure if anything's required. So if you don't have to do duet, don't worry about it. But this is a hoop that doesn't even matter anyway because it's the easiest one out of them all. It's 10 minutes and there is no pressure because there's no right or wrong answers. I did not prepare for this even 1 second. It's like answering dating questions where you can't really get the answer wrong. You have options for each question. You rate your interest and your priorities. For example, a school might, or a question might say, which do you value more? A school that emphasizes research, learning, techniques, or parent interactions? Some schools might look at this to see if you're a better fit, but there is literally no way, I believe, that they can use this to make any real decision about you. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on it real quick, the AAMC, SJT, and VITA. What I believe kind of happened was AAMC created their own versions to compete with the Casper and the Snapshot. The AAMC SJT is a situational judgment test, which is like what the Casper is. I did not do this. I did not find that it was required for any school. Some schools said it was important to do it. I didn't even do it then, and I still got accepted to one of those schools. The AAMC VITA is kind of like the Snapshot of Casper, where it's a one-way interview. They use this though, I think because of the pandemic. I didn't do either of the AAMC SJT or the VITA. So the hoop section is kind of boring, but let me just give you kind of my one central piece of advice. Prepare for the Casper, the new Casper, and you really shouldn't have to worry about too many other hoops that come your way because the Casper encompasses it all. So the Casper is what's called an SJT. So if you prepare for the Casper, you'll be prepared for anything that's like the Casper in terms of having to give your response to an ethical problem. Also, you'll have to give one-way interviews online. If you do the Casper, that means you're gonna be prepared for the Kira assessment, you're gonna be prepared for the AAMC VITA if they ever still use that. Focus on the Casper, put your prep into that, and you'll be prepared for any other hoop that hopefully comes your way, or hopefully doesn't. There you go, buddy. Finally, a super practical, maybe the most useful part of the video for some people, the timeline for everything I did. Overall, I felt like God was really watching over me with every part of this application because looking back, I believe that I followed a pretty darn good timeline to the T, and it seemed to work awesome. I wasn't insanely crazy with anything. I gave myself a good amount of time to do things in life. I wasn't perfect with it all. I worked full time, but I was able to do everything without completely wanting to kill myself. This is going to be too much for some people right now, but it will be helpful as you progress to compare your timeline with mine. So don't get freaked out if you're not doing everything exactly like me, but use this as a reference to just understand what it will be like to apply to medical school when everything will be due. So my 2021-2022 application cycle, let's dive in. The primary application. March 1st, I started working on my personal statement. March 7th, the first draft of my personal statement was completed. It was very rough. March 7th, I also started working on my experiences. March 14th, the first draft of my experiences were complete. March 19th, I emailed all of my letter writers and asked them to start writing my letters of recommendation officially. I gave them timelines, personal statement, experiences, transcripts, everything else to help them write letters and basically know a little bit more about me. I asked them to have all the letters ready by early May. April 18th, I started researching medical schools and creating my list of choices. Throughout April, I also worked on my experiences in my personal statement. May 3rd, the AMCAS application opened and I started entering transcript scores in other work, but it could not be submitted yet. May 4th, the AA COMAS application opened and it actually was able to be submitted. Again, I started entering transcript scores, all the work, but I did not submit this application right away. May 4th, I also completed the Casper test. May 7th, a minor hiccup, I found out that the AA COMAS primary application wanted an essay written about experiences with the pandemic. I started working on this and it took me a week to finish. May 10th, I started collecting my letters of recommendation and I used Interfolio to store the letters. May 13th, I completed Snapshot and Duet. May 15th, another hiccup. I found out that in the AA COMAS, the primary application, that some DO schools required additional essays to go along with the primary application. May 17th, I completed the final drafts of my personal statement and experiences. I probably had about 8 drafts of each. May 20th, I finalized my list of DO schools I was going to apply to, and on May 21st, I submitted the AA COMAS application. Yay. May 26th, I finalized my list of MD schools I was going to apply to. May 27th, the AMCAS application became open for submission, and I submitted it on that first day. I did not use the TMD SAS. And that brings us to the secondary application. May 31st, I started pre-writing secondary applications. I did this by looking up what essays had been in previous years. June 15th, I received my first secondary application from a DO school. June 25th, I received my first secondary application from an MD school. August 4th, I received my final secondary application from an MD school. August 7th, I received my final secondary application from a DO school. August 11th, I finished all of my secondary applications. Thank the good Lord. August 12th, I created an update letter that I sent to schools to update them about my new activities and work. The fastest I submitted a secondary was 2 days. The slowest I submitted a secondary was 30 days. For every school I cared about, I submitted the secondary at a little over 2 weeks from receiving it. Interviewing. July 19th, I received my first interview invitation. It was from an MD school. August 3rd, I received my first DO interview. August 13th, I completed a Cura assessment. I did very simple prep for this. August 29th, I started my serious prep for interviews. I did a lot of my own prep and I did 4 mock interviews in total. 2 were free, 2 were paid for. September 10th, my first DO interview. September 29th, my first MD interview. October 8th, my final DO interview. October 27th, my final MD interview. My last MD interview offer was January 5th. I completed all 8 of my interviews in September and October. Ta-da! Well, there you have it. That's all the information that I wish I would have had in one video to kind of start my application cycle. Again, this is hopefully to get you on solid ground. Certain things are going to be different from cycle to cycle, but one thing kind of remains the same. The cycle is grueling. Applying to medical school is tough, and if you don't, know that already, man, all you gotta do is go on Reddit for 30 seconds to the pre-med Reddit and you will just see so many people who have a hard time with it. And I think a lot of the reason for this is maybe a lack of belief, and that things are going to work out in the end. It is tough work. It is grueling. Writing that many essays kind of sucks. And then interviewing can be very nerve-wracking. But the truth is, anything in life that's worth it is pretty darn hard to work for. I was super upset at many nights. I lost so much sleep. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get in, all this kind of crap. And I think a lot of the times I was my own worst enemy, and we all kind of are. If you can just take one step at a time and you have belief that you are able to do this, man, you're going to be so much better off. It's going to be so good for your mental. So don't think about all the numbers. Don't think about, man, there's just somebody sitting there and all they're looking for is a 520 MCAT. That's not true. Schools are holistic. You can definitely get into medical school, but you got to take it one day at a time during the application cycle, and you got to work at it a little bit each day. You don't have to be nuts. I was not nuts. There was nothing I did that was incredibly crazy. I think I just put together a wonderful application because I stuck to who I was. I stuck to my strengths. I showed the people why I wanted to go to medicine so very clearly. I do think there are schools out there that you are going to be a good fit for. Focus on those schools. All of my acceptances came from schools where I was a very good fit for. Like Loma Linda, I'm a Christian. It's a Christian school. Jefferson, I have some connections at Jefferson. My dad went to Jefferson. And then University of Arizona Phoenix, I'm an Arizona resident. I've worked on the Navajo Nation. So every school I kind of got accepted to was a school that I was bought into, and that was probably why I got into it. I worked more on my essays, I cared more about it, and whatever I wrote resonated with them. So focus on the schools that you care about. I hope this video helped in some way. I'm only doing these videos, by the way, because I got some time before medical school, and I thought, hey, I like to make videos. Why not try and help some people? I'm literally just trying to help people. I don't care about the subscribers. I don't care about the money. So if you have some other video that you want me to do, I'm going to be making videos based off of what anybody says in the comments. Even if it's just one person, whatever you want me to make a video on to help you out, I'll try to make a video on that to help you. All right? So take care. God bless. Good luck. One day at a time. All right? Try to enjoy it. Peace.